Well, I am super thrilled to be here with an amazing guest today, Mr. Joe Pane. Thank you, Joe, for joining us on the Empower You podcast.
Thank you, Brent.
In this episode of the Empower You podcast, we're diving deep into the world of emotional fitness with the true master of the game, Joe Pane. With decades of experience coaching thousands of people, Joe knows exactly what it takes to build resilience, break through limits, take control of your emotions.
Doing that changed my life, like going out cold calling for 15 months, taught me more about human behavior than my psychology degree ever did. If you have a big enough why, you can handle any how. And my why was, I'm not going back. The hardest thing that you've ever done is still the hardest thing you've ever done. If the hardest thing you've ever done is put up your hand once on a 2-day weekend, it's the hardest thing you've ever done. That's got to be respected.
I knew I'd really enjoy this conversation. For a lot of students that are going through HSC, feeling stress and anxiety around study and performance, do you have a hot tip for them?
There's two things. First, it's normal to feel that stress because you care. Second thing is put your attention on where you'll be beyond that exam.
Now, you talked about a formula that you have around emotional fitness. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
So there's 5 core focus points in the emotional fitness formula, and these are in order of poundage. In other words, in order of power, in order of impact. The first one is
I had the great pleasure of meeting you some time ago through a mutual friend, Dale Beaumont. And then you, of course, heard of the work that I do at Empower You. You had your boys come along and, we just really hit it off. And, of course, I had you along at our All-Stars online webinar series, and I was just absolutely blown away. And I would like to unpack that particular session with you today, but I was blown away by not only what you had to say, but how you said it. I mean, I've been doing this work for 2 decades now with teenagers, and it's not an easy audience at the best of times. And you were absolutely fire. So I thought straight away during that podcast, during that webinar, I should say, I've got to get you on this podcast. I have to spend some more time with you and unpack, all of your teachings, your wonderful book, Courage to Be You, which we'll certainly speak about. But maybe let's start off for the audience that doesn't really know you. Could you give them a little bit of your background and I suppose what brings you here today?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Brent. This is so exciting. I love this. My background's in psychology and sociology. So I did my degree way back in the 90s. Was blessed enough back then to get work in the space. So I worked as a rehab counsellor at Ford Motor Company in the manufacturing industry for a couple of years. Discovered very quickly I was working in a very toxic political environment, which I just didn't know how to navigate. So I was, it was the first time I experienced being lost in my life because I thought this is what I wanted to do. I invested 4 years of my life at uni. Here I am at this work and I don't like it. So I left that and a colleague of mine sort of linked me up with a coach trainer fellow in the real estate industry, and I ended up working in real estate sales for the next 7 years after that. And that made a massive difference to my life because they asked me to go out door knocking. So I remember when my future boss had said to me, we need you to go door knocking, I thought he was speaking metaphorically. I said, how do you mean? I don't understand. He goes, you need to go and knock on doors to find people who are selling. I said, right, I'm still trying to work out the metaphor. And I realized, oh my Lord, this is literal. Doing that changed my life, like going out cold calling for 15 months, as I said, just to build my database and everything. Taught me more about human behavior than my psychology degree ever did. Certainly more than my rehab career ever did. 7 years doing that. And then I had some time off from work. I took another year off on a sabbatical and I explored the realms of, I did vision quests, silent retreats, meditation, residential retreats. Just immersed deeply in the world of consciousness, spirituality, understanding to the best of my ability how, life seems to work and what it means. And then I ran out of money. So I went back to my old job in real estate and I had a wonderful relationship with the beautiful people there. But it was trying to put the toothpaste back into the bottle. Like it was impossible. So, and then I was sitting under a tree having lunch, literally in a park, eating a sandwich. And I saw this advertisement in this magazine that I was reading on how to create your own personal development business. And that's when and then the long and the short of that is I ended up a few short months later, in 2006, starting my consulting, training, coaching business with my psych background, sociology background, and my experience in sales as well was very useful in providing programs for organizations. I've worked with everyone from, big sort of international corporates all the way through to school principals, school teachers, small business, everything in between. And that's been the last 18 years, and it's been an incredible journey so far. And here I am now with you.
Yes. And I'm super grateful for that. I also want to acknowledge that there are some people listening to this live. So please share any of your questions live that you'd like Joe to answer, also on Instagram as well. We were going to start off with a question that you posed to me, the difference between two things. But before we get to that, something perked my interest because I can very much relate to it. But something you said, which was door knocking that you did, you learned more there about human psychology than anything else you had done up until that point. Now, I did letterbox drops, I did door knocking, and I did flyers on the street for about 12 months, and I recognized that was character building. But I'd love for you to just expand on that. Why was that so impactful for you? Why did you get so much out of the act of door knocking?
It was repetitive, intense experiences of uncertainty. So there was many things to unpack here in the sense that, first of all, to go and do something like that, you have to be really motivated. Now, what motivated me was I had a moving away motivation pattern back then because I so hated my job at Ford and I so did not want to go back there no matter what. That this had to be, I had to walk through this doorway of cold calling to be accepted into a team that I wanted to belong to and be a performer in and work in sales. So first of all, there had to be the metaphorical fire behind me to push me to do this, because there's no way in ordinary everyday circumstances, if I didn't have a reason to door knock, then it's like everything in life. If you don't have like Nietzsche's famous words, which I'm ad-libbing, if you have a big enough why, you can handle any how. So, my why was, I'm not going back. So it was a negative reason, but it was still powerful. There was that. The second thing is, every door that I knocked on, I had no idea what was behind that door, what story was behind that door, what kind of person was going to come to that door. So it taught me how to think on my feet. Every micro moment, so I'd finished speaking to this person, and I thought, that was a wonderful experience. How lovely were they? And then I'd go to the next door, and the whole episode would repeat again. Completely no reference points. Got no idea what's going to happen now. And all I can do is just knock on the door and just see what happens. So it also taught me that with life, and this is the element of psychology that really was instilled very strongly in the visceral experience of this, was you can't escape life. You can't go back the other way. You can't go around. I can't go around the house. I can't walk away from the house. I have to go and knock on the doors of that house. So life is all about going through, not going around, not going above, not finding fancy distractions or going back the other way. Acceptance is a primary ingredient of transforming your relationship with uncertainty. In the work that I do, I found that when people share with me, intense difficulties that they've gone through in their past, when enough time's gone by, they discover very quickly that those difficult moments were the biggest blessings in their life. And if it wasn't for that moment, they wouldn't be the person they are today. If it wasn't for that moment, they wouldn't be able to handle the responsibilities that their life is presenting to them today. So every problem, every obstacle is a preparation to take us to the next level of who we're being so we can handle the next version of life.
Yeah, look, I love that. There's a couple comments you made about, I can't go around the house, I've got to go through, like open the door. I was actually having a conversation yesterday with a graduate and someone who's part of our SIS team. I'll shout out to Mel, who works for Canva. And we were supposed to have coffee this week, and she'd cancel, saying, look, my Tuesday's really busy. Can we just do a phone call? I'm like, that's fine. And when we did speak, she says, well, I said, oh, you were busy. What happened? She said, well, I had to do a talk to all the staff. Now I'm thinking 50 people. She said, no, 5,000. And I was like, wow. And we got into this conversation. I said, well, 5,000 people. She said there was 100 live. The rest were on Zoom, but nevertheless, 5,000 people in the audience. I said, how did you go? Were you nervous? She said, well, I just did it because I had to. And I thought that was I love that response, because people often ask me about presenting, what are your strategies getting on nerves? I said, well, I don't have any strategies. I just know I have to do it. So I'm presented with a challenge and I have to do it. And I think one of the challenges that I find with my audiences is that getting stuck in the indecision can overwhelm us. Yeah. And often we need to put ourselves in positions of difficulty to grow. And those challenges are meant to make us better, not bitter. And I saw a quote the other day that said, our most difficult days present our greatest lessons. And I love it at Empower You. And I know your boys have been through that. We'll come back to that later. But I see huge benefit for any human putting themselves in positions of difficulty and challenge, because it's the only way for us to grow. So, of course, within that framework, you talked about moving away from things. And one of the concepts you talk about Empower You, when I do talk about emotions, is we either are motivated to move away from something we don't want or move towards something. So pain and pleasure are motivators. But we talk about emotional intelligence and emotional fitness. And you made a point with me earlier this week that there's a big difference between the two. So maybe we could start to unpack our conversation around emotional fitness with the difference between that and emotional intelligence.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll do that in about 10 seconds. I just wanted to add to what you just shared, because something important that you just brought up is that, we've just spoken about situations where we have to do something. You have to do that presentation. You have to go and do the door knocking. You have to do the insert hard thing here because of something a situation that you're in. Life is not always like that, though. So one of my sayings that I think it's in my book, life is either squeezing us or we're squeezing it. So when I was in that position of the door knocking, that was life squeezing me, because everything was getting tight around me, so I had to do something. Now, what happens in life is that life settles down. And what happens to a lot of, I know a lot of young people listen to this, but when people get into their 20s, 30s and 40s, what happens is life settles into a rhythm, and some people become stale and disengaged. And this is where it's really, really important, and this is linking into the emotional fitness definition that we'll get to in a second, is that we have to become what I call conscious inviters of uncertainty into our lives. Conscious inviters of uncertainty. What does that even mean? It means that we make conscious decisions to do hard things because they're hard and because of how we're going to feel on the other side of it. A classic example was only 3 weeks ago, I ran a full marathon, the Sunshine Coast Marathon. Now, so Nicholas was in the car with one of his friends and his mum, and the mum said, what's your dad been doing today? Because Nicholas had mentioned that we'd been in Maroochydore. He goes, Dad did a marathon. Oh, was that one of those 5K fun runs? It's like, no, the 42.2 kilometre full marathon. Oh my God. And it was hard, Brent. And in fact, I was told yesterday that our body cannot remember physical pain. It's just a memory of it. So I've already forgotten how bad it was, but it was tough. And as hard as it was, the contribution that it makes on an unconscious level. In other words, when you do something hard, you don't need to necessarily have to language, this is how it's added to my life. It's just made you a better person. It's just made you a deeper person. It's just made you someone who can just handle more. And a lot of depression and anxiety is because of a defensive reaction to uncertainty. A lot of it is based on that. And so what happens is, the message I want to share with everyone here, and just in this micro moment, is become a conscious inviter of uncertainty. Go and do things that are either hard or unfamiliar or uncomfortable. I'm not talking daily. I'm not talking weekly. I'm talking a handful of times every year. And then what happens is life has less reason to squeeze you, because if you're squeezing life, it has no reason to come to you to say, listen, you've been a bit slack the last 5 years. You really haven't been doing much. You haven't been growing much. So we're going to mess up your relationship so you can grow, because you haven't been growing. And growth is a perpetual need of the human condition. So we know that across skill sets, relationships, economies, markets, businesses, as Ray Kroc said from McDonald's all those years ago, you are either green and growing or you're ripe and rotting. So you're either breathing out, breathing in, expanding or shrinking. Nothing stays still. And as human beings, we need to perpetually keep growing. And guess what the precursory seed, guess what the prerequisite to all growth is? Uncertainty. So, which brings us to the question that you've just asked. So I needed to add that, because I think, too many people live their life by default, meaning, and that can be interpreted in many different ways, but what I mean by that is that they wait for life to come along and give them the pain, or, I've been really slack in my job for the last 10 years and suddenly now I've lost my job because of it, or my wife or my husband or my son or my daughter or someone's walked out on me because I've become disengaged or whatever, and then I become a victim of circumstance and all this sort of thing. This wouldn't happen in our lives if we were conscious inviters of uncertainty, if we were squeezers of life, if we did hard things. And on the other side of that marathon, it was just sweet. I was basking in the glory of the reflection of it all. And it was just beautiful. And I'm still riding off that 3 weeks later. So these are the things that matter, I think.
To that point, I share a story of, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, a friend of mine desperately wanted for his 50th to go to New Zealand to climb this mountain because he watched a movie called Rob Roy with Liam Neeson, and apparently it was filmed in New Zealand, and he said, I have this dream of going on my 50th. Would you come and climb this mountain with me? So I said, you know what? Sure, I'll do it. And we went there totally unprepared. And I just thought, well, if he thinks he can do it, I can do it. And we got into this trek, and it was 60 kilometers over 48 hours with a 2-kilometer ascension. And we started this trek, and a couple hours into it, my back was aching, like seriously, like almost crying in pain. And I thought to myself, this shouldn't be this hard. What's wrong with me? And all this self-talk. And I ended up finding out I had the straps wrong. So it was just totally throwing my back out. Anyway, I remember wanting to quit at least a dozen times. I was getting shin splints. We're going up this mountain. The weather was coming in. It was horrific. And there was time and time again in real time, I just wanted to go. But there was no helicopter going to pick me up. No one was going to save me. The only way to get off the mountain was to finish this trek. And it was without a doubt the hardest thing I've done in my life. But like you said, when I finished it, the pride I had, the joy I had on reflection, as soon as it was done, the physical pain was over. And I just thought, I cannot believe I did that. That was extraordinary. And it showed me that we are capable of far more than we actually think we are. And rarely do we put ourselves in positions to challenge ourselves. And rarely has anyone regretted the challenge after the fact.
Yes.
Maybe during it, there's a sense of overwhelm in the struggle, but once they get through and have the prize, it's all worth it. And we realize that that's how we build character and resilience and all those wonderful things that make us the best version of ourselves.
100%. Absolutely. I love that story. It's designed to help us become, as I said a moment ago, become the next version of us so we can handle more in life. So to circle back to your question, emotional intelligence versus emotional fitness, and I need to segregate the two. And this is not to say the one's better than the other. They're just completely different skill sets. There's lots of definitions on emotional intelligence. One of the definitions to describe emotional intelligence reasonably accurately is emotional intelligence is based on your awareness and understanding of how you're creating your emotions, having an understanding of that, and having an appreciation of how it is that you're impacting other people emotionally and having an understanding of why they feel the way they feel. And there's many more layers to that definition, but that's sort of the EQ area. It's more awareness is like the center of that orbit of emotional intelligence. Excuse me. What separates that from emotional fitness is a preparedness for the unknown. It's preparedness for challenge. It's the preparedness for growth. It's a preparedness for something new. So emotional fitness is like a psychological preparation skill set for handling and navigating the inevitable, in other words, the guaranteed challenges that we'll have in life. So the purpose of emotional fitness is not to make uncertainty easier. Otherwise it wouldn't be uncertainty. It's about giving you the skills, the psychological tools to navigate uncertainty with clarity and direction. It doesn't make it easier. It just makes it possible. And that's the key difference. And emotional intelligence is very powerful in your everyday interactions with people. Emotional fitness is very powerful when you're facing a dilemma, when you're facing a fork in the road, when you're facing pressure, stress, anxiety. Am I enough for this moment? These kinds of situations. The next metaphorical door that you're knocking on, that's emotional fitness.
Yeah, I think, and that's a really good distinction. And I reference the events that I run, and many people listening will know about our Empower You weekends and our camps. And what I know to be true is that the longer a student stays with me, the more they embrace challenges, which I would say is leading into emotional fitness. Yes. They say, give me more, Brent. Yeah. I'm prepared for the confrontation because I recognize the growth in that rather than the fear of the challenge, if that makes sense.
100%.
Now, you talked about a formula that you have around emotional fitness. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
So first of all, there's 5 core focus points in the emotional fitness formula, and these are in order of poundage. In other words, in order of power, in order of impact. The first one is identity. And identity, as I'm sure you're aware and and I'm sure you teach, is the single most powerful force in the human condition. Now, this is true for many reasons, that it's the most powerful force in the human condition. One of the reasons is because so identity is what we allow ourselves to be defined by. There's lots of definitions for identity. That's one of them. It's what we allow ourselves to be defined by. So if I'm defined by the roles that I play or the results I'm getting in my career, I'm going to become hypersensitized to how well or not well I'm doing in those results, which means that when things don't go my way and the results I'm losing or I'm winning depending on those results, and if my identity is wrapped around it, I'm going to take those losses profoundly personally. And if I take them profoundly personally, it's going to impact my ability to navigate the uncertainty of that, the challenge of that. So in my work, what I teach people is how to move away from defining yourself with external factors like your roles that you play, and define yourself more by the character of who you're becoming, because then you're not going to be as hypersensitized to the results that you're getting in those various roles that you have in your life. And when you're defined by your character, you're asking different questions. You're asking yourself, instead of, gee, I wonder if I'm going to win, I wonder if this is going to work out, you're asking yourself, gee, I wonder how this is going to contribute to who I'm becoming, in all kinds of surprising, wonderful, difficult, easy ways. So identity is the first focus point. All of these focus points are designed to transform our relationship with uncertainty. That's the very definition that I have for emotional fitness. It's about transforming our relationship with uncertainty so we can grow on a more sustainable basis. So identity is number one. Number two is life stages. Life stages is about the journey from ambition to meaning. It's the journey from experiencing the egocentric experience of living life in the ambition-driven world, which is nothing wrong with that. The ambition-driven world is all about building what? Building our experience, our knowledge, our reference points, our learnings, our skill sets. It's about building security. It's a whole bunch of different building phases. And most people go through this from their late teens, early 20s, all the way through into their 40s, and some people into their 50s. It's the ambition-driven world. And then we all arrive, at some point we get to a point where we start asking the questions of, so what does all this mean? We start finding at some point in life that what used to excite us no longer excites us. So what used to motivate us no longer motivates us. And that's because we're going through some kind of evolutionary shift. These evolutionary shifts are linked to our values, and we'll talk about values in a second. So then what happens is we move from the ambition-driven world into the meaning-driven world. And the meaning-driven world is more heart-centric. And in the meaning-driven world, life becomes less and less about us and more about others, but not to the detriment of us. So the ambition-driven world is a very self-absorbing world where it's all about me and how I'm progressing in comparison to other people. The meaning-driven world is more about how I'm making a difference and focusing on contribution and purpose and meaning. The meaning-driven world is the journey to becoming nobody. The ambition-driven world is the journey about becoming somebody. That's the massive difference. And all of us at some point, whether it's in this lifetime or the next or whatever, we all get to a point where we go, oh my Lord, it's never been about me. It's actually about becoming nobody. Now, guys, for those of you listening, I'm not talking about being a nobody. That's not what I mean. What I mean is where you don't become the center of the universe for everything that you need to do. In the meaning-driven world, we live in the purity of that we have got nothing to defend and nothing to prove. And that's a journey to come. We need to also respect where we're at. And a lot of the beautiful, teens that you have that follow your wonderful work, Brent, they're in the ambition-driven world. You need to be remaining loyal to that. What you teach are the skills that build them to the ability to start respecting money and improving their relationship with money, for example, and how you can make money. Here are some ideas on how you can start your own business. Here are some ideas on how you can invest, save. This is all the ambition-driven world, because you can't stay in the meaning-driven world without money. So at some point, there's an integration phase, the integration of ambition into meaning, and that's when our journey is becoming a lot more complete. So that's the life stages part, and there's more to it than that, but that's the essence of it. The third component of EFF stands for Emotional Fitness Formula. The third component is values, and I define a value as our emotional compass that influences all of our decision-making. A lot of people confuse their values with their morals. These are two completely different conversations. A value is an emotional compass. A value is like the fuel gauge on our dashboard of our car, whereas our morals is our temperature gauge. It's very different. And often people confuse the two, and there's a lot more to it than that. But values is the third component of EFF, because as we evolve through life and as our responsibilities continue to expand, our values and priorities evolve and change as well. So we need to keep up with who we're becoming around that. And then the fourth phase is emotional flexibility, which is what we focused on the All Stars webinar on. So the emotional flexibility defines that emotions don't respond to facts. Emotions only respond to the interpretation that we have of the facts. It's the meaning that we're giving what we are experiencing that influences how we feel. So in other words, what's important to know about that is that most, not all, but most emotions are manufactured and fabricated by how we think and what we focus on. And then the fifth and final component is our perspective. So perspective is our purview of life. It's our big picture view of how things actually are for us. It's clarity of what matters and what doesn't matter. And it's our philosophy of living. And so the reason why it's important to build a very clean and healthy perspective is you're going to need a clean and healthy perspective to lean on when things get hard, when things get tough. Now, if our perspective is unhealthy, if it's unfit, if it's messed up, if it's full of victimization and drama and all that kind of thinking, then our perspective is not going to help us. Someone's saying, hey, can you look at things as a perspective? It's not going to help. But if we're got a clean and healthy perspective, then we can jump up to that straight away. And to give your listeners and the beautiful people listening here, the most direct route to creating a clean and healthy perspective is to give yourself permission to have instant access to gratitude and appreciation. Because when you have instant access to gratitude and appreciation, it's easy to jump out of the drama into perspective and ask yourself the question, what are you actually grateful for here?
Yeah, look, I love that summary. Thank you so much. And I think that your comments around gratitude really resonate with me in terms of perspective. And I think I'm always such a big advocate of asking quality questions. And I think that's one thing that lacks in so many people is we don't ask ourselves enough quality questions anymore. And I think a large part of that is just we're constantly distracted. And I think to that point, what are your thoughts on, and this is a really big question, but I often get asked, you know, Brent, you've been doing this for over 2 decades now. What has been the big changes in your audiences? And I've always said that the big changes for me are poorer communication skills and a real lack of resilience, a sense of entitlement. And when the going gets tough, there's an often apathetic feeling for so many young people. What are your thoughts on the changes, why there's been such changes in people's mental health? I think, you know, mental health in young people's doubled in the last decade. Someone who's an expert on emotional fitness, what do you think are the big causes or reasons for that?
Well, it's really challenging when you've got the most powerful computer that's in your pocket, literally, that you can pull out, and it is so easy to be distracted. It's so easy to, we know all this already. It's so easy to be distracted by whatever platforms you're on, whatever social media platforms you're on. Because I remember you mentioned the book, and I bought it and I read it, Stolen Focus, I think it's called.
That's right, Stolen Focus, yes.
So it's really about now making conscious decisions in terms of how much you want that phone to be in control of your life. So, for example, some basic strategies that we've employed at home and also I do in my own life is that up on the library, there's a shelf in our library that's like a little basket that has all the chargers and different things for different things, you know, bits of wires and bits and pieces and connectors and stuff, and it's out of sight. And so what I'll do during the day is after I've checked or updated my emails and checked this and the other, Messenger and all the different platforms, my phone, I put it in on silent, I put it in to that box and I leave it. And it's so amazingly powerful when something is out of sight, how it's out of your mind. I think there has to be a conscious decision made by the parent or the child or the person or the adult, whoever they are, where there's time away from the phone. Because I have found that when I'm working on my laptop or if I'm doing some writing and my phone's sitting to my right, all it takes is just a little flash and it's got my attention. All it takes is I reach over to tap it to see if there's anything going on. I check markets. I check this. I check that. It's like, my Lord, I spent so much. So it's got to go in that basket. If we don't consciously choose to do any of these sorts of actions, then our distraction is taken away in directionless journeys. The reason why I successfully wrote the Courage to Be You book is that anytime I went to write, internet was off. It was just me and Word, the Word app. So I think we can choose to be responsible for what we focus on, or we can allow all of these social media platforms to take our focus away from us. It's our choice. It really is. And I just want everyone to know, whether you're 16 or whether you're 46, it is really easy to be distracted by the incredible technology that our phone is. And don't get me wrong, there's lots of phenomenal things that we can utilize out there, but it's kind of like trying to tune into all of the radio stations at once, and you're not going to learn anything that way. All you're going to be is distracted in very unresourceful and unhealthy ways. I think the most powerful thing we can do in our lives to manage distractions of social media, to improve our relationship with uncertainty, is to take on a hobby that sings to our soul. And that's a hobby that you do that is independent of everything else in your life. You're doing it purely for self. It's like an expression of functional selfishness, where you get to take care of you, and then there's more of you to take care of all the other challenges in your life, including the discipline to manage that little computer that sits in our pocket.
No, look, I think you've made some wonderful points there. And one of the things that I want to highlight, and I totally agree with, was just the need for things where we're a little bit more action oriented in life. There's I don't know if you followed the Toy Story movies, but they're going to do a fifth Toy Story.
Oh, wow.
And it's going to be toys versus screens is the topic of conversation, because we've seen such a change of like playing with things that are action orientated to just observing. Yeah. And I often say, and one of our dear mentors in our community, Ingrid is her name, she often says that so many people in life are just in the stands watching rather than in the game of life. And and to your point around hobbies, I would say that one of my biggest virtues or qualities is that I'm a very passionate person, in that I get into a lot of things. So I'll get into a hobby. Like, I wasn't planning on referencing them, but here I have some collector cards.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're just 3 of thousands that I have, but it's a little hobby that I'm very invested in. And I've got, I play soccer, and I've got I collect posters, and I've got all these things that I'm really invested in for no other reason than they bring me joy.
Yeah.
And I think that for so many people, they lack purpose. And I think when you lack purpose, that's when distraction is at its worst, because we have, it's there for us to take our attention. And I found that the benefit of Empower You is there's an awareness that's ignited. And almost, when we talk about technology and social media, I certainly do it when I have the most rapport with the audience, because there's buy-in to listen. But when I run through tips like, don't charge your phone in your bedroom, first and last 30 minutes of your day, no phone, have a daily tech break, have a monthly day off, everybody universally says, you're right, it's true. I need to take more control and ownership of my relationship to technology, because I acknowledge that it's probably not serving me in the greatest light. And fundamentally, I think in its simplest terms, I often say to my audiences, whenever you're entertaining a new idea, ask yourself a simple question: does it serve me or not? And if it doesn't, entertain it and say, maybe that's not for me. And if it does, embrace it. And you've just got to entertain the idea and ask that simple question. But I think that the first challenge is having a conscious awareness that there's a problem in the first place. And that's probably the challenge we deal with. I want to ask you about a word and what you think this word means to you, and why you feel it's become such a big challenge in society. And that word is, and you kind of touched on a little bit, anxiety. What do you think anxiety actually is? Where does it come from? And how can people overcome it?
Great question, complex question. So we'll do our best. So I'm going to talk in parallel terms of anxiety and depression. They're different things, but they're kind of like in the same family, if that makes sense. They're like 2 children of the same family, if that makes sense. So first of all, we need to establish the fact that in a lot of cases, anxiety experiences or depression experiences are very normal, healthy responses to difficult situations. That's something that has to be acknowledged. And anxiety and depression exist, like everything exists in nature, because it's got a purpose. So, for example, if I'm feeling anxious about an activity I'm about to do, or that marathon I'm about to run, or that thing I'm about to do, or back in the door knocking example, feeling anxious, there was anxiety through that. There was heaps of anxiety around that door knocking when I first started. Why? Because I deeply cared about navigating through that experience so I could get to the other side to continue my career. If you think about it, if I didn't care at all about that door knocking experience, if I had no skin in the game, if I had no attachment to it, if I didn't care, I wouldn't feel anxious. In fact, the anxiety was the motivator that got me to do the thing. So I think the word is overused in the current day, and it's used in a way.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk over you, but I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think it's certainly overused. Yes.
It's overused. Yeah. Where anxiety becomes an issue is when it's free floating. In the world of psychology, they call it free floating anxiety, which means that you're feeling the experience of anxiety, but you don't know why you're feeling that way. It's not connected to anything obvious. It's not connected to anything direct. That's when it becomes a problem, and that's where you need some external help to help you navigate through that, to get to the source of what created it in the first place, so you can resolve that. Depression is the same. You can have free-floating depression where you're depressed for no particular reason because the essence of what initially depressed you, you've disconnected from, but the feeling of depression has remained. So there needs to be a reconnection to that misplaced resource so you can work out what caused it, so then you can change the cause. There's that conversation. But depression is fascinating because put aside clinical depression, which I think sometimes clinical depression is just everyday depression. Depression is a normal, healthy response to a difficult situation. If I had have failed at that marathon last week or 3 weeks ago, if I had have experienced a very, very disappointing result, I'd be in a depressed mood a little bit about that. And it's a normal, healthy response to something. Or in a lot of cases, it can be, my father passed away earlier this year. There was depressed mood around that. That's a very healthy, normal response to the passing of someone who's been so significant in your life. So that's normal. And Silvana and I were talking about this. Silvana's my wife. Silvana and I were talking about this the other day. She was saying how depression is almost like the valley of life. It's like you've been climbing these mountains that have been difficult. It's had its challenges. Then there's a valley that's depressed in the land that you need to just chill and be there. And depression is designed to stop you taking further action so you can reflect on your decisions so you can choose wiser. That's its purpose. It's to stop us or pause us or to slow us down so we can make more intelligent decisions and add to our awareness of what we've been doing and how we can change that. That's another purpose of it. Another purpose of it is, again, linking it to care. So when I was in real estate, it was based on wins and losses. It was a very dichotomous world. You either got the sale or you didn't. You either got the business or you didn't. It's the same with my business today. You either get the business or you don't. So, and back then, I used to take my losses really personally because I identified with them. So I'd have depressed moods over, opportunities that I thought were really mine and didn't come my way. Again, a very normal response to a very healthy, normal response to a challenging or difficult or disappointing experience. So both those words, anxiety and depression, are overused when people say things like, I've got social anxiety. Is social anxiety a real thing? Yes, it's a real thing. But often it's just normal. I'm going to give everyone an example right now. Like, I've been doing this for a long time. At the moment, I'm experiencing about 70, probably closer to 80% of my business, my trainings are still online on Zoom. And sometimes I'll go through months and months and months and months where everything's on Zoom and I'm not traveling, right? I'm here in Sydney with you right now. I haven't traveled for a long time other than to my dad's funeral, but that's different. That's a different experience. But traveling for work. So I noticed that, like, I'm a pretty chill kind of a guy now, right? I've been chill for a while. I hope my son's backed me up on that. And I'm certain my wife will. But I found that as my, I got the email from Virgin saying your flight reminder coming up. Now, was there anxiety in me? Well, there was 0 out of 10 anxiety, and then the anxiety might have been a 1.5 out of 10, where I'm starting to think, I need to start organizing myself. I need to make sure I've got this, this, and this. I need to make sure that I know where I'm going, like what cab I need to take, where I need to go. I've got this on, that on, this on. These are places I've never been to before. I've never been to Sutherland. But I didn't get anxious about it, but the anxiety level went from 0 to 1.5 out of 10 because you need that to focus. Now, I find that if I haven't traveled for a while and I'm going somewhere that I haven't been to before, there's a little bit of anxiety, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a very normal, healthy response that turns your focus on so you can be effective. And again, it's also because I care about the journey ahead. I care about my journey to Sydney, which was I need to do this, and then I need to go and see Brent, and I need to have this podcast. So there's care about it. That's my take on it. Depression and anxiety only becomes an issue when it's free floating. Remember, free floating means when you're having the experience of either or of these things, but there's no obvious cause to it. And I believe that there are ways to discover what those causes are by asking intelligent questions. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, look, a couple of things that I really love that you said there. The fact that there's a purpose and a benefit. And I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, it's okay. It's all normal. And often people say to me, I've been training up some people to present, and they say, what do you do when you get nervous? I say, well, firstly, nerves, are you respecting what you're doing?
Nice.
It means that you care.
Nice.
And I've always said that whenever I've gotten a little bit comfortable, and I don't know if you've ever experienced this doing work on stage, and by comfortable meaning, I've had such certainty in myself that I'll just get up and do it again. Whenever I get too comfortable, I get a lesson. And usually my audience reminds me and I'll be humbled. And I always say, whenever you're feeling anxious, nervous, it's a reflection of you respecting, and it's important. So I really resonate with that. Here's what I'd like to explore a little bit more with you and get your thoughts on. You'd mentioned about when it's free-flowing.
Free floating.
Free floating, my apologies. I have found that when I started running Empower You, no one knew what the word anxiety meant. Yet now, if I ask an audience, hands up those who experience anxiety on a relatively regular basis, I'd probably get 90% of hands go up. Now, it's not to say that back when I started it, they weren't feeling that. They may not have just known how to articulate it, like the framing of that word, like, oh, what does that mean? But I do think there's been a shift. I don't think my audiences are happier, more well-balanced, stronger. I think it's kind of the reverse, not to be all doom and gloom. But what frustrates me is when people indulge in it and use anxiety, as an excuse to back out of something, or a justification to go, this is all too much for me. I'm not strong enough, good enough, or worthy enough. And I also know from my work that sometimes parents can indulge that behavior. And out of love and protection, but it's actually doing them a disservice. And so that's where I know that my work can be the metaphorical medicine that the child needs, even though they don't need it to be forced, to be pushed, because the end outcome is beneficial, and it's something we talked about earlier. So in a roundabout way, what would you say to those that often use anxiety as an exit? What would you say to them, or what advice would you give in terms of coping with and pushing through? Because my comment would be, you've just got to do the thing you resist most until you get comfortable with it. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you don't like public speaking, that's the thing you've got to do. And yes, it's scary, but often most fears just false evidence appearing real. We have a whole lot of scenarios of what might happen, because often that kind of fear lives in the future, the possibilities. And there's only one reality. There's a whole lot of possibilities to stop us. Don't buy into the possibilities, accept that's okay and it's there. But there's only one reality. And maybe that reality, that thing that one possibility comes to fruition, that fear that you have. And I often say, as long as it doesn't kill you, it's going to do one of two things. You're going to get the outcome you want, or the lesson you need to learn. And this comes back to asking quality questions. And point number 5, which is perspective. So loaded question there, but what are your comments or thoughts on those that indulge in it?
Well, in life, you can either be, a victim of circumstance, or you can transcend those circumstances. So, and transcending those circumstances is exploring within yourself, and this is all linked to awareness. It's exploring within yourself what it is that, what's the secondary gain, the payoff, what is the alternative agenda that you're serving by choosing to remain a victim of circumstance. If you're focusing more on the drama and the problem, well, now you're tuning into Problem FM, then, well, what's the juicy payoff you're getting out of focusing on the Problem FM? Have you unconsciously become what I call a getter of significance, where that becomes your source of someone giving you attention? Now, the moment you become what I call a getter of significance, or unresourceful significance, and I know that you teach those core needs in the program, is that unresourceful significance is unsustainable. You can't do that forever, because the very thing that's giving you that significance loses its impact, and then it's like when people get addicted to painkillers, the painkiller has less effect. You need more volume of it to have the same effect, and it gets to a point where all the painkillers in the world don't have any effect, which is what killed Prince and what killed Michael Jackson and these stars. They became they became addicted to painkillers because of the issues that they had in their bodies. So there's that side of thing. So that's really important. So you it comes back to the conscious awareness of choosing whether to be a victim of circumstance or choosing to transcend it. How do you transcend it? You transcend it by letting go of the juicy payoff that you're getting from it. It's by learning how to become a giver of significance rather than a getter of significance. So by giving significance is where you start adding value to the experience of other people experiencing you. How do you do that? Lots of ways. One of those ways is to smile. When you're walking down that supermarket aisle or wherever you are, you just smile to a stranger. Now, this can be taken out of context because a lot of your beautiful people are very young and they're not going to feel comfortable smiling at a stranger walking down a supermarket aisle. I get that. But it's the attitude of the smile. It's the attitude of what you bring. That makes a big difference. But there's something else I want to add to this, and it's this, is that, and this is going to fly against the logic of everything that you and I kind of like stand for. So the language is going to seem, what I'm about to share with you, the languaging of this is going to seem like I'm flying against what we're talking about, but just hang in there with me and follow the thread to the end. Sometimes the addiction to anxiety, the addiction to getting attention to unresourced significance is because we've set our standards too high. And so when our standards are too high, it's actually an elegant, advanced, self-sabotaging strategy. Because what happens is when our standards are too high, so if I'm 5 foot, whatever, 8 or 9 or something, if I'm trying to touch the ceiling in this room, which is about 2.7 meters high, without my feet leaving the ground, and I say to myself, well, I've got high standards, and I say to the world, look at my standards, they're so high, I'm going to be reaching this ceiling without leaving the floor, I know within myself that that's unrealistic. The world looks at me and says, oh, wow, you're amazing, even though I haven't done anything. And in the meantime, I am within myself, kidding myself that these standards are realistic. I'm just sabotaging my life. So here's my answer to your question. It's by lowering your standards to a level where you can practice experiencing anxiety in a micro capacity. So I used to run a weekend called Courage to Be You. It was a public personal development weekend. I used to run from Friday night to Sunday night. And there was a young lady who was at the front row, and it took her every inch of her being to be in the room. On the Friday night, I asked people why they're in the room, what brings them to us. And this lady was shaking literally in the front seat. And so I gently, she didn't put her hand up, I gently referenced her, and she had the courage to say some things. And she said that she hadn't been out of her house for years. And she was, her biggest fear was that she'd go home from the Friday night and not able to come back Saturday. So we had this conversation on the Friday night. And so I said to her, so you've been you're being literal with me? Like you've been inside your home for all these years, you haven't, well, she said, well, it hasn't been years, but definitely the last year I've barely left my house. I said, okay. So do you have any shoes or runners or anything like that? Well, yeah, I've got runners, but I haven't worn them for, a long time. I said, well, I'm giving you the short version of this. So I said, so what I would love for you to do tonight when you get home or tomorrow morning when you wake up is to put your runners on and sit on the couch with your runners on at home where you normally sit, but don't do anything. Just put the runners on your feet and just notice how it feels. Notice the difference in how it feels. And just experience that and then take them off and put them back wherever they belong. Then the next phase is to do the same thing. You put your runners on, sit on the couch, notice how it feels, and walk with those runners around your house, inside your house. Stay inside, it's all good. Just move around. Notice how that feels. Put them away. The next step is put your runners on, sit on the couch, notice that, walk around, perhaps just go out your front door and go to the letterbox that's just, a few meters from your front door. She described the house to me. Go to the letterbox and just check what's going on in there, and then walk back in and notice how that feels. Take your runners off, put them away, stay inside all day, it's all good. Then the next step is the next day is to put your runners on, go out to the letterbox and just walk to next door's letterbox and then come back inside. And we continued this until she was walking around the block, until we got to the point where she was able to leave her home like you and I would without even thinking, even though there was some anxiety there, but nothing debilitating. And that's what would help her, or has helped her, prepare for the natural, inevitable, precious challenges, anxieties, and depressing experiences that life brings. So sometimes we need to lower our standards so they're within reach, so we can attain that progress. As we know, the core ingredient of all success or all beauty of life is progress. When we're progressing, we're feeling good. And sometimes people confuse progression with high standards. It's like, well, if your high standards are unrealistic, set low standards that stretch you. But like, in other words, I'm talking about there's a difference between getting out of your comfort zone, which is unsustainable. You can do that, but you can't get out of your comfort zone every minute of every day. Just that's energetically unsustainable. You can do that. It's good for you. But what's sustainable is expanding your comfort zone. By lowering your standards where you get to expand your comfort zone, putting on those metaphorical runners. In her case, it was literal. But putting on your runners, sitting on the couch, noticing how that feels, it's an expansion of comfort zone. It's comfortable, but it's mildly uncomfortable. And you keep building on that. That's how you build a life skill that will look after you for the rest of your life. And then when that relationship gets tough, when you lose that job or someone that you love passes away, you can navigate it. But if she stayed on that couch and never left ever again, well, that's sliding the other way. That heavy defensive reaction to uncertainty would eventually kill her.
Look, I love that. And I think a quote came to mind that resonates with me with this conversation, and that is that comparison is the thief of joy. And I relate to that at times in my life. When I marry up with, well, we're talking about standards. Oh, well, I should be this, and I look at this person and they've this, and well, I'm like that. And then I realize, hang on a second, we're all running a different race. And I should be preaching to myself what I preach to my audience, which I always say to Empower You. I want your best, not what we think should be the best, but what's your best? And I often say, let's say I've got a room of 100 teenagers. I'll say for one person's best, it might be leading their team, volunteering in front of the whole group, dancing in front of everyone, and just playing full out. And another one's best would be putting up their hand once over the 2 days and speak in the microphone. And because I often acknowledge what you just said there, is just like we're all running a different race, and it's about being invested in the little wins, because it's all those micro steps. And it's you know, I always say, and at my camps, I spoke about this with your boys. It's one of our final processes I'm not going to spoil what it is, but it's about taking that first step. And I always say that I'm always prepared to take the first step with people forward, even if it's a small step, but I won't take the step backwards. And another point I wanted to make that came to...
And just to add to... hold that thought. Because I want to add to this is that what you just said is really important there, right? Is that the hardest thing that you've ever done is still the hardest thing you've ever done. If the hardest thing you've ever done is put up your hand once on a 2-day weekend, it's the hardest thing you've ever done. That's got to be respected. And I know that you respect that, but most importantly, the individual that's done that for themselves has to give themselves that gift of self-respect in that doing. And sometimes what happens, Brent, is even as adults, even in business, we compare ourselves. Well, I've done that. I've done this. You compare ourselves to something really hard that someone else has done, which lives on a completely different orbit, in a completely different planet, that I can't relate to, but I go, oh my God, that's incredible. Like, for example, in my running world, there's some people who do 240-kilometer ultra marathons. And the hardest thing I've ever done in the running world is a marathon. In comparison, a road race. Comparison to that, it's a completely different thing. So I need to give myself a break, which I do. And I say to myself, well, the marathon's been your hardest thing. Good on you. The next thing might be an ultra that's 50K, not 240. But often in life, whether we're teens or whether we're in our 50s or whatever age, we compare ourselves to other people where the hardest thing that they've ever done is just different to ours. And I reckon the point that you bring up about if the hardest thing you've ever done is to put your hand up twice this weekend or once this weekend to speak for 30 seconds on some key learning that you've made, I congratulate you, I salute you, I admire you, I respect you, I love you. I think that's phenomenal. And that's something we need to remember. Just please remember, guys, the hardest thing you've ever done is still the hardest thing you've ever done. It's about comparing you to you. Yeah, and that's just adding to what you're saying.
Yeah, no, look, I love that. And I think, there's a mentor in our community called Michael Adamides, and he takes, it's at our advanced event that we run, and he takes everyone through a dynamic meditation. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's an hour, it's a very accelerated form of meditation. It's very physical, very physically demanding, and there's a bunch of stages, and it's a real kind of a bit of a detox, and it's very confronting. And Michael says, look, you've got to go to your limit. But like to your point, but if you're a professional athlete, well, your limit might be 50K run. But if you've never got off the couch and you're overweight, well, you might be a kilometre. But just go to the limit that you can go to. And acknowledge that, and I think another comment I think is important to make is that Empower You, we talk about every belief we have, good or bad, is based on references. References are things that validate that belief to be true, big or small, past experiences. But I often say it's not just the reference, it's the meaning you give the reference. Yes. Which is something you articulated in different language earlier on in the podcast. But there's always a way in which we can change the meaning of the reference if we ask again, comes back to asking quality questions. Changing gear a little bit, when you reflect on all of the experiences that you've had, have there been any experiences or moments that stood out as really important life lessons for you?
Yeah. Yes. So there's been many when I first started there was a defining moment, a negative one, when I was about 3 years into my journey of doing this for a living. I delivered a training for a local real estate office, and it was just a 1-hour session, and that all went well. And then they said, "Oh, listen, we're getting our network together for an event in a couple of weeks. Be 150 agents in the room, and all the owners of the businesses there." And they said, "Could you come along and do a 90-minute session on expanding on this work?" And I said yes. But the work that I presented, that was everything I had. And so they invited me there. I went there. I remember Silvana coming with me, and it was just awful. Like, I was all over the place. I didn't know what I just said. I couldn't remember where I was going. There was a inconsistency in my messaging. My language was all over the place. I was inaccurately describing human behavior. It was a schmozzle. And it was the longest hour and a half of my entire existence. And I remember getting off stage. There was a polite clap in the room. Got off stage. I could see the way my wife was looking at me that, yep, it is what I've experienced. If she's looking like that, it's true. It's true.
Everyone else felt like you.
Yeah. And it was about an hour's drive home. Most of it was silent, and I was quite depressed because, and again, that's a very normal, healthy response to a situation that I buggered up. And I remember talking about meaning. There's a meaning-making menu that drops psychologically and visibly in front of you all the time. And in that moment, I could have made it mean anything, of course. My ego, so our ego mind, which is the conscious voices that we are aware of, is addicted to fear. And so it wants to minimize everything because the ego is a control freak. It is heavily addicted to certainty. It doesn't like anything beyond its control. So if it could keep me contained within its realm of control, then I wouldn't continue expanding my skill set to improve and become better at what I was doing. So the meaning that my ego wanted to give this was, it's true. You suck. You've never been good enough. What other evidence do you need? Go back to a job. Go back to where you came from. You don't belong in this space. You certainly don't belong on that stage. It was that kind of thing. And then my coach training and my psychology training kicked in because it was like, how do you know that it's true? What a great question. How do you know that what you've just said to yourself is true? Based on what evidence? Based on what you just experienced. Hold on, that's an isolated incident. Where are all the other reference points? What makes you think that? What if what this means is it's a very strong metaphorical slap across the face to prepare better, to respect the audience better, to respect your work better. And oh my Lord, what if it means to respect yourself better? So that was a meaning path that I chose to go down. And so that changed that experience so it wouldn't impact me in that way. I've had the same experiences in marathons. Other than the marathon I just did a few weeks ago, the last one I had done before that was back in 2019. All the indicators in my body was that I wasn't ready for this marathon. I overrode that. I ignored that. I went and did the Canberra Marathon, and at 28 kilometres, I experienced this thing called the wall for the first time ever, where you can't do anything about it. No positive thinking can fix it or change it. Your glycogen stores are out, your fuel system. It's like saying to yourself, my car is out of fuel. My positive thinking is going to help me get to where I'm going, even though I've got no petrol left. Yeah. It's like, it's not going to help. It's just not real in that context. And that happened to me in that marathon. And I walked back. I don't know if my sons are listening to this right now, but I was it was a horrible sight, me coming to the finish line, and they walked beside me through the finish line, because in the Canberra Marathon, you enter this park, and the last 100 metres is in this beautiful park with this tree-lined path, and they were walking with me. And I sat down, and my wife saw that I was depressingly disappointed, and she said to me, you know, you can choose to go down that path, or you can choose to reflect on the fact that you've done it, and I'm sure when the time comes, not now, when the dust settles, there's lots of great learnings to come from this, lots of wisdom to come from this, and lots of knowledge to come from this. Right now, just enjoy the exhaustion that you're experiencing as we sit here. And, you know, so I'm not sure if I've gone off the path here in terms of my answer to your question or the point. But often defining moments are called that because defining moments can either boost you toward your dreams or they can move you away from your dreams. And it's your choice because as Brené Brown says, you know, we are meaning-making machines in a world that has no meaning. So become consciously aware of the meaning that you're attributing to that negative experience. And the other question I ask myself even more these days is, what has been my role in creating this experience? How have I contributed to this experience? What's been my contribution? And back then when I did that real estate gig that just was horrible, back in the day, the question I did ask later when the emotional dust settled was, how did I create this for myself and for what purpose? And that was that took me down a different path. And as you know better than anyone, Brent, you know, the way you shift your focus is by changing the question that you're asking, because the question that you're asking focuses on a different channel, a different FM radio band. And so they're the sorts of questions I was asking myself. And then I asked myself, do you want to experience this again? Hell no. Well, let's create defining moments that are progressing us forward rather than holding us back. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
No, look, you have it. I think ultimately the summary of that is that there's the events that shape us, but more importantly than the event, it's the perspective and the meaning we give that event. And that, we can't change the event, but what we can change is our meaning towards that event. And that is everything. And the question you had, the last one, which was, how did I create that event or that experience? Isn't that the most empowering question you can ask?
Yeah, it is. It is. And something that might be really useful to the wonderful teens listening to this, and my boys were shocked when I shared this with them many years ago. When I was I was brought up in Melbourne, and in Melbourne there's HSC, which is the Year 12 certificate, high school certificate. And I got through Year 10 and Year 11, pretty much 90% of it winging it. Somehow I got through. I decided to, in a very lazy way, have an experiment that I kept to myself, which was to get through HSC without studying, without doing the extra work. And lo and behold, I failed my HSC. And that was a defining moment because I remember getting the certificate in the mail as we're all waiting, and my parents with their jaw, they couldn't believe it because I kept this to myself that I wasn't putting in the effort. And I thought, I can get through this because you can get through this, you know. And I was translating that. I didn't know, but what I was doing back then, Brent, is I thought this is how life can be. You don't have to work hard. You don't have to put effort. It'll work out. So I didn't do it. I didn't put the study in. I failed. I remember that was one of the lowest points in my life. I wasn't aware of the conversation that we're having even existed, that these questions that we're talking about. And I remember my dad being so disappointed, to put it really mildly. My mum just didn't know where to go with this. All I knew was, oh my God, the first time that life slapped me with the reality slap of, well, if you don't put effort in, then you're going to get back. It's a reflection of who you're being. So you're being slack. You're not committed. You're going to experience an uncommitted, slack result. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I'm going to have to go back there next year and repeat the shame of that with the kids and other people seeing me. Now, my dad kind of semi-rescued me because he moved me to another school where I was a complete stranger, and I learned my lesson. I studied my butt off and got through HSC the following year and then made it into uni, so because that was my focus. And then the philosophical side of me, Brent, as an adult, says to me, well, it was all intentional somehow. And now, boys and girls listening to this, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say something unresourceful, okay? So I said to myself, well, that was actually really well done, because you see what that did was it delayed your entry into uni by 1 year. It means you started uni at the age of 19. And when I was 19 and when I started uni, I met my future best friend at that year level. I wouldn't have met him if I had passed HSC the first time I did it. And because of meeting my future best friend, his name's Rick introduced me to my future wife. And my future wife was going to give birth to my sons, Oliver and Nicholas. So if I had have passed HSC, exactly.
You totally were patting yourself on the back.
So that was one way and what I'm saying here, guys, is that was just my way of justifying why I did what I did. But so we certainly learn a lot more from our losses than we do from our wins. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I totally agree with that too. I often say, one of the core concepts, the first concepts of Empower You is around comfort zones. And we're all familiar with that term, but I think what we expand on that conversation is that, when we step outside of comfort zones, we often experience a whole lot of emotions. And when I ask the audiences, and this is, tens of thousands of people ask this question to, the majority of the answers are negative, meaning we have a negative reference to stepping outside of comfort zone. And I say, well, if that's true, then you don't want to step outside. So let's change that reference. But what's the overall feeling? Let's call it fear. And when we feel this fear, we've got one of two choices. We either push through that fear or we step back. When we step back, we validate that fear to be true. So we give it oxygen and it becomes bigger. Every time we push through that fear, we create either we get the outcome that we want or we get a lesson that we need to learn. And I think it's really that focus on growth that is so crucial for all of us in life. And ultimately, as we continue to grow, we achieve success. And what is that? Everyone has their own definition for success, but for me, it's about, I love this quote from Earl Nightingale, which is success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. But I think all we're saying here is that there's, life happens either to you or for you, and however you look at it, I think it's quality questions, looking for meaning and value in things, acknowledging that there's experiences in our life that either build us up or break us down, and that's our choice, and that's our responsibility. And I think that's a very empowering thought to have because we are in control. If we choose to be. I did have a final question for you. And we could talk forever. There's no doubt about that. And we definitely going to do a follow-up. But given I have a teenage audience, I have a lot of graduates years later. And when I say years later, I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years later now that I've reached out to, or they've reached out to me and they say, I'm a mother now, I'm a father now, I'm a business owner, I'm a husband or wife. And I look back now on what I learned with you, and it's more valuable to me now than it was then. Like I didn't have the life experience, the awareness, the critical thinking, the quality questions to even acknowledge in real time how powerful that was. As an adult now, looking back, I see it. So my question to you is, if you were to give some advice to your younger self, what would that be? You're 15-year-old Joe in the playground, and here you are, wise, experienced, reflective. What would you say, given that my audiences of that ilk?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably lots of things. What would I say? Progress is all that matters. Yeah, progress is all that matters. Self-respect is the biggest gift you could ever give yourself. So be aware when you're not respecting yourself, in terms of how you feed yourself and in terms of food and and all these different things. Be kind and patient with yourself when you can. What else would I say? I've never been asked this question. This is new neurology, Brent. This is a new pathway.
You're welcome.
I would say, as long as you remain, and the question will start, the answer will formulate more and more as I speak it through. The more committed you are to your own progress, the better the things will work out. And the way that things are going to work out is not like you can imagine today. It's beyond your current imagination, and just stick with it. Because I want to add a comment to that thought, because often what happens is when we're, say, 15 years old, we're seeing the future through the filters of a 15-year-old. And when you're 19, you're seeing the world differently because the filters have changed. In other words, your psychological world, your experience of the world is beyond 20 years old, is beyond the imagination of a 15-year-old. We can only see as far as the headlights of a car can shine. So, and the reason why I bring that up is, that's what I mean when I say be patient and kind with yourself. Cut yourself some slack. Like no one's got it all worked out. Remember that, and reflecting on this conversation, remember that you're going to have moments of anxiety and depression. Remember that things will, not maybe, they will go wrong. And you're going to, as long as you remain committed to progress, your life will look after you. Because I can reverse engineer that in my mind and say, well, let's subtract progress, let's subtract commitment. Well, how are you going to navigate the inevitable difficulties of life? So that's my answer now that I'm speaking it out, is my advice to my 15-year-old would be just remain committed to some kind of progress no matter how low the standard is.
I love that. And it's interesting. I just ran a very difficult program in Melbourne. And there was a student in there that was quite resistant and was sitting next to a revisit who'd been a part of my community for a while. So I went up to this revisit and said, how are you going with so-and-so? I said, yeah, they're really struggling and they don't understand why you're asking them to put their best foot forward. For what benefit? To which I said, for their own benefit. I'm not asking it for any other reason than you should put your best foot forward for you, which is similar to what you're speaking about. As long as you're progressing forward, pushing yourself forward, however small that is, and acknowledgement is crucial to this. And it was just funny that you've brought that up because that was just a very recent experience. And I thought, isn't it interesting that this person was asking why they should put effort in? What's the benefit? And I'm thinking it's for you. This was all designed not for me, not for anyone else, but for you to bring your best version to the forefront. Okay, so Joe, I'd just like to go into some community questions now that I have for you. So the first one is from Lisa, and she has asked, how can someone start an emotional fitness journey?
Yeah, great question. So given that emotional fitness is measured by the quality of our relationship with uncertainty, it's by just doing little things every week that expand your comfort zone. Please remember, so Lisa, remember that expansion of comfort zone, you can do that forever, all the time. It's very healthy to get out of your comfort zone every so often and do something completely different. But if you just do different things, it might be walking to, say you've got a friend that you walk to, you might walk down a different street, or you might just try different things, or you might embracing a healthy curiosity around different experiences you can have. You might be curious about learning how to play a musical instrument to see if that does anything for your spirit and your feeling of self. Or you might go and try yoga or CrossFit or something that is outside of the scope of what you would call normal for you, because you get to practice becoming emotionally fit that way in safe environments where the worst case scenario is, well, that guitar playing journey didn't work out too well. But who's going to get hurt from that? Nobody. So that's how you would begin, by being what I call divinely curious about trying different things, and that's how you continue to expand your comfort zone, which is the essence of becoming emotionally fit.
Fabulous. Got a couple more questions. The next one is from Seb, and he's asked, how do you maintain emotional fitness over a long period of time?
Yeah, great question. Well, that's kind of linked to this answer I just shared with Lisa. It's becoming is it Seb?
Yeah.
So Seb, if you early on in the podcast interview here, I shared about the importance of becoming a conscious inviter of uncertainty. So by choosing to do hard things in safe environments. So doing a marathon, for example, climbing a mountain, with your friend there at his 50th birthday. If I was going to say doing it in a safe environment, probably mountain climbing is not the most appropriate example. But the point I'm making is that by becoming a conscious inviter of uncertainty in your life, by embracing with conscious choice the challenges that you can bring into your life, that's how you maintain your emotional fitness journey right through.
Wonderful. I've got one more question from Jimmy. And Jimmy's asked, you talked about ego being addicted to certainty. So how do you lower ego to then master uncertainty?
Great question. So there's a field of therapy called ego state therapy. And in ego state therapy, they state that there are up to 15 different voices or characters that exist within a fully functioning human being. When I discovered that, I was quite relieved, to be frank, because I didn't know that was normal. So what happens is some of these voices support you, some of these voices tear us down, some of these voices are your everyday voices that tell you, this is where the milk is to make your milkshake or whatever, right? So the voices that tear us down, the voices that are fear-based, a lot of the voices are addicted to certainty. The simplest, most direct route to managing these voices is that when they speak up, you just simply say thank you. Full stop, no further commentary. You just simply acknowledge them because they're starved of significance. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. They want to be validated, but you're not really validating by saying thank you. You're just acknowledging that they exist. So for example, when I first started this journey of doing what I do for a living, training, coaching people, doing in this kind of work, the first ever presentation, the second ever presentation, the third ever presentation I ever did, the voices were having a field day in my mind. So all I would do was say thank you. And the most important aspect of this advice is don't add any further commentary beyond thank you. Because then when you add further commentary, so if I say, thank you for insert story here, the ego is going to start attacking the story I've just fabricated in response to their story. So it's just thank you. And do it with inside voice. Because if you walk around life saying thank you on the outside, people are going to think there's something wrong. So that's the succinct advice I've got for you is thank it. And no further spin on meaning, no further interpretation, no further story. Thank you. It'll keep coming up. So what will happen is it'll keep coming back. It'll keep coming back. But as you continue saying thank you, the voice starts to lose its power and its momentum. And it'll get to a point where the voice sees no point because it gets getting acknowledged. There's no fire you're giving back at it, and it'll eventually just disappear into the abyss.
So I got a question from AJ. What got you into this type of work and why?
Great question. I initially started at uni in a science degree, applied chemistry and food science and technology. I was completely in the wrong territory. And I was working in a lab one night, and one of my colleagues noticed how disengaged I was with the lab work. And this person said to me, "What are you doing here? You're not a things person. You're a people person." I had this was an epiphany that was beyond amazing. "What do you mean?" I said. This person said, "Well, there are some people who are into people and like to work with people, and there are some people who prefer to work with things like technology or this stuff that we're doing here in this lab." He said, "You don't like to work with things. You're a people person." And that was the spark that led me into going, "Oh my God, I'm a people person." And then I started exploring my options in psychology, and that's when I became fascinated with the human condition. So really, it started off as an epiphany of someone making that comment, and then it became a very intense interest. And all I wanted to do was work in the capacity of people. And that was one of the motivators also that added to my journey into sales as well, because sales is all about human psychology, as well as the rehab work was human psychology. And obviously everything that we do here is all human psychology. So
what I love about that answer is it's really, I bet you if you saw that person on the street and said, "You remember that time?"
This is all your fault.
Said, and they're like, "I don't even remember the conversation."
That's
but
right.
It stayed with you forever.
Forever.
It's really interesting, isn't it? How
Forever.
a little kind of...
It's amazing.
Yeah, seed planted. There's one more question from Anna, and she says, Brent often shares quotes from stage, favourite quotes that he lives his life by. Do you have a favourite quote?
Well, I think my favourite quote is, and I don't mean to sound like a so-and-so, but I love the quote that I made up, which is, life is either squeezing us or we are squeezing it. I think that I adore that because I think it's so true. It's so accurate. It's so powerful. So, yeah, that's one I like.
We got to get that up on the wall, a Joe Pane quote. I like that one. I like that one. Well, thanks for all the questions that were sent in. So at our seminars, I talk about Tom and Jerry, the cat and mouse, and how Tom comes up with an idea. There's this light bulb. I call it the aha moment. And it's a real thing in our community. So this section is the aha section. And I have some questions for you, some rapid fire questions. For a lot of students that are going through HSC, feeling stress and anxiety around study and performance, do you have a hot tip for them?
First, there's two things. First, it's normal to feel that stress because you care. Second thing is put your attention on where you'll be beyond that exam, how great it'll feel after it's all done.
What's a common misconception about emotional intelligence that you like to debunk?
People often misunderstand emotional intelligence as just all the feely stuff, but it's actually about understanding how you've created that emotion and therefore how you've created that experience and to take responsibility for that.
How do healthy relationships contribute to good emotional fitness?
So healthy relationships should be enriching you and enriching your experience of life. If a relationship is depleting you, there's only two things you can do. You fix it or you leave it. But if the purpose of a healthy relationship is to enrich your experience, enrich their experience, and together there's an enriched experience of living, if that makes sense.
In finishing up, Joe, where can they find your amazing book? I'm halfway through it. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't finished it, but it's fantastic. Where can they get your book? And
on Amazon. Or they can go. My website's my name, so it's joepane.com.au. On there is a link, or you can just go straight to Amazon. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Joe. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Empower You podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. For more information on our live events, please head to www.empoweryou.com.au. We look forward to having you join us again for the next episode of the Empower You podcast.